We started in the most beautiful way. That's probably one of the most beautiful ways which I've ever started this particular event, because it was thought of. Most times I come to these events and it wasn't even thought of. Let's be outside. Let's be on the land. And let's acknowledge who we are. Let's acknowledge that we are people trying to be on a journey together. Let's acknowledge the fact that we sometimes falter. Let's acknowledge that we sometimes celebrate. Let's acknowledge that we're people of God working stuff out to be together. That we've met their ancestors who've been on this land. But we came together in the most beautiful way in the early stories. When the first peoples on the Nova Scotia island saw newcomers come in, they called them, oh, my new cousins. My new cousins. So, and if you thought about that and that acknowledgement, there was already a beginning of a story to be told of what it means to acknowledge each other. You are gifted, we are gifted. How can we be gifts together? The earliest contact between the Beatuk and the Europeans who came over was positive. And so much so that when the First Nations people at that time came, they saw you get off the boat, and they saw your shoes and your little roughy outfits. They says, these people ain't going to survive. We better give them some love. And so that was the first act. You came off the boat, you needed some love, and we gave it to you. So that's the part that I really want to acknowledge. Can I put my coffee in this? Is that okay? So we're going to acknowledge that. So there's this group called We Are Tree People, and Tim did a beautiful job of that. But over time, through a series of choices and maybe fears, right, we came into a different type of relationship. Where even in this land, even in today, when we look out into the land, you have to say, my goodness, there is a lot here. There's a lot of wealth here. A lot of prosperity here. Like even today, even after years and years and years of cultivation, there's plenty to go around. Plenty to go around. But sometimes we get scared. Fear builds inside of us because, look at him, he's so much better than me already. You know? He's cuter, hairier. Well, that's a good thing too. You know? But then I can say, oh, Tim has all this so much stuff. And I may want it. So then there's a breakdown of relationship earlier on between the First Nations peoples and the Europeans. And in other words, I'm going to use the word Europeans a lot in this particular context. And it's not that people of color are not part of this particular conversation. They will come in, they're later participants into the story. But the early stages was between Europeans, particularly in the First Nations people. And then Bernard Laveau Marshall did this famous painting. When I was in seminary, you know, I used to go to ceremony all the time, and I loved it, and I still do. And I was feverish about the Creator and the Lord. And then I said, oh, I should become a priest. And I was on fire. Like I would go down the streets of Edmonton looking for people to heal. Heal, Tim, heal! I was serious. Like I believed it. I still do. So then I went to know, the bishop said, well, you better calm that down. I'm going to send you to seminary, right? So my first year of seminary, it was like I was sitting in these classes and I was on fire still. a priori question. Who is God? And we spent the first 4 years of my seminary trying to figure that out. And I was like, these white people don't know what God is. I'm in the wrong spot. Right? Because of the question. And in that questioning, in that worldview, there's what I would call cognitive dissonance. When a First Nation person puts their idea of how we should be family, how we should be on the land, how we should have economy, how we should govern ourselves, right? There's a natural by learned, cognitive dissonance. One between a social order, which the Europeans believe in, and what I would call social cohesion, which a lot of indigenous people believe in, right? So there's this automatically a disconnect between these two founding peoples of this country. So you see, the First Nations persons with all their, colorful dances and, everything. It's beautiful, and these two English guys going, what? Right? And Nerval put it so that there was no way in which either could enter into the world. That was the sadness of that particular time. There was a point in time when the wall between First Nations and the Europeans became almost impenetrable. The idea where we no longer even saw the other as human. Right? We no longer saw them that way. We saw them as savages. We saw them as incapable of salvation. So that was the breakdown. And to me, it was not the work of Jesus Christ who said those things. It was not the word of Scripture that pointed those things out. It was a very specific worldview that allowed that thing to happen. So people often ask me, how can you be a Christian? I'll say, I'm a horrible follower. I'm a horrible Christian in some respects, but a great follower of Jesus Christ. Right? How could you be a follower of Jesus, but still be an indigenous person? They seem disconnected because of the word, because of the truth. So we're going to talk about differences in worldview. So when my white colleagues and I have conversations about space, I move, he's now really conscious of my movements towards him. He's so conscious, what else is he going to touch? Right? He's going to come in, I already come in, my hand's coming up already. Because he goes, brother, I believe in personal space. It's actually 4.3 feet. That is illegal, and there's a whole bunch of people that are in trouble right now because they're not maintaining that personal space, which is awesome. They should be. So it's the equivalent of a handshake. That is how we are meant to be apart. But this actually has a philosophical idea, and that is sovereignty. Right? He is sovereign in himself, and I am sovereign in myself. I hold myself as sovereign. There is no possibility, nor should there be, any cross-matching between those. He's entitled to that personal space, to his personal ideas, who he is, all that. All wrapped in one little perfect nugget. And I'm entitled to that as well. Personal space. Well, Crees and most other indigenous peoples of this land hold space a lot differently. What I would call intimate space. So when I was growing up, I went back to my First Nation community in Saskatchewan. So my mother, Donna, is a residential school survivor. All my family is residential school survivors. Like, there's not one that didn't go to residential school. And my grandfather went to residential school. So we are very much part of the Indian residential school experience. So when we went back to my First Nation community in James Smith, all my cousins would get shipped out there. We would like a convoy. School would end. We'd spend the summer in our community. And we had this thing called the mission house. It was the former priests or pastors of that time were trying to, mission the First Nations communities on our reserve, and they had built this house, and they gave it to my grandfather. And so my grandfather had built another house, and so then we had this thing in the mission house. And there'd be about 20 or so kids, roughly this age, would go, and we'd live in this particular house. And on the top floor of that house was a series of mattresses and blankets and pillows and all that kind of stuff, right? And then my grandfather and my grandmother would just shoot us all up there, and that's where we slept. There was no specific, let me tell you, there was no personal space, right? You fit that many kids and that much toes. Like, who slept with their child in the remember those moments? Mm-hmm. And now you take 20 of us, all intermingled, and sometimes, I don't know how we end up, we all slept and we all woke up and you didn't know what was yours, So there's already a concept of an intimate idea. And First Nations people still hold that very dearly. To the point where there's not only blood intimacy, but I would call breath intimacy. So my mother passed away a year ago. Beautiful woman. She would have been here with me if she was still alive. She was a person that was able to show forgiveness so easily through Indian residential schools, through experiences with her own family. She'd be the first person, even if someone did her wrong, she'd be the first person to call up and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? Because she desired to be intimate with people. She desired that level of forgiveness and hopefulness to be the very nature of relationship, not hurt and not distance. So that's an important part, that we would automatically desire to be intimate with each other. Right? And that's an important concept. But not only do we have, here I am, my sovereign self, and this is mine. But Indigenous people have a different intimacy. The intimacy with what I would say with the land. Like even now, if you go to the cleanup right now in Edmonton, there's massive amounts of cleanup because a lot of Indigenous people are still living in the river valley. Right? Even in the midst of the cold February, people are still living there. Right? And it's not that they don't know about, furnaces and all the wonderful technology of European culture, but they also feel very trapped in it. Right? So the only way sometimes, maybe there's addiction problems, sure, mental health problems, sure, but there's also a deep need to be intimate with the land. That they don't believe that the land is the only thing that can cure them sometimes or hold them well. Right? So there's an intimacy that Indigenous people have with the land. So simultaneously, am I intimate with my neighbor? I'm also intimate with the land. Those two intimacies drive, still to this day, most First Nations people. Right? There's an intimacy in terms of space. So we've got a space difference paradigm. Oh, thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. And this is a biggie between that. I just ran into this the other day. Someone asked me a question about, why are Indians always late? What is this thing about Indian time? And I said, girl, the people I find, I go to a lot of events, and the people are always late.
I got lost.
And they always get lost. That's right. So the beginning of it, so Europeans have a very linear concept of time. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when a lot of people, and they said, why can't your people just get over it? Why can't you just move on? Like, we gave you all this money, why don't you just move on? To me, it's not only inaccurate, but it's a time question. But they're saying when they hear that, when First Nations people hear that sentence, why can't they just heal and get over it? The question they're hearing is, I want to be with you. What they're saying is, when will you be assimilated? When will you finally be assimilated? How long in that long linear journey will you finally be assimilated? Well, First Nations people don't think about time that way. There's no beginning, middle, and an end. There's only a series of beginnings, a series of newness of relationship, a series of intimate experiences. I'm going to come here today. Let me tell you, this is honest to God truth. I'm a horrible driver. I'll own that. Like, I got lost coming down, and my hotel was like down the street. I got lost, right, because of the turn, right? Well, that story threw me off. So this experience here is going to change me because of the newness of how I'm going to do this. Every time I do this, there's a newness of relationship, right? A newness of how I come to something and how I engage it. Though I got lost in this little bit of thing, I could have said, and it freaked me right out and said, oh, I'm going to be late or whatever. No, this gave me an opportunity to renew something, to know time differently, right? Because there's a little girl who I'm so thankful. Thank you for being here. You're awesome. Thank you very much for being here. Because interactions are part of time. So an Indigenous person comes across and something happens, or a family member is sick, or there's a bigger experience in the world, that takes precedent over other concepts of time. Not because we think there's no end to it, but we think time is a new opportunity to have new relationships and a new experience. So the concept of time is not, when can I get over it? When will this day end? We know life is circular. There is a new tomorrow. If you're not well on the beginning of the first day, you will not be well at the beginning of the second day. Right? Somewhere in that moment, in that time, you've got to find something that's not linear, that you've got to get over. You've got to find things in your life that are life-giving and preserving and hopeful. Whether they are if they're family, or if they're teachings, if they're children, if your own history, it's a series of relations. Time for us is very much about relationship. Very much about relationship. Not about how we can move and progress to the next thing, but how we can learn. Because we're all going to end up in time in the earth, ash, dash, and dust to dust. Right? And that's okay. Right? That's okay. That's part of the whole concept of time. So, this is probably the most personal story that I'll probably tell in many things of this time. So, if you were to, right now, Google family, what you will get up is a picture of a mom, a dad, a boy, and a girl. It's called nuclear family. That's what you'll get. So because our economic paradigm, how the foundations of this country, in this place, are built on this nuclear paradigm. It's not bad. It's just what it is, right? So there's a mom, a dad. In fact, if you go to anywhere else, right, in the world, that is not the economic paradigm. But here in the Western world, that is the actual. In fact, if you're going to go to a swim, it's family tickets. It all includes 2 adults and 2 kids. Heaven forbid you have a third kid. That third kid would be like $47. You know, the whole family is 26, but the third kid 47. Like that poor third kid. No, that's why those babies are always like feeling bad, right? Because you can't have more than 2 kids, right? So, and this is the first thing that I made up. Extravis is what I call covalent families. And an indigenous family is made up and still is, but pre-contact time, women were useful. Men were not. Plain and simple. So people think, oh, these big epic stories of, the cowboys and the Indians, where all the men were doing all the stuff, and these great, men would go out there and do all the hunting and all the gathering. Let me tell you something, the truth about that. So men would hunt maybe 6 times a year for maybe 3 days, maybe. Because Crees, there were a lot of buffalo before you all came. Right? And let me tell you, it wasn't that hard to chase some buffalo down a cliff. Right? That was their job. Honest to God, that was their job. To chase a buffalo down a cliff. The buffalo would go down, and the women would then do the grooming. But that was the first part. But the second part was what we call a giveaway. So after the hunt, right, the women, the senior women of that particular organization would then set up, and they would decide who would receive the bounty of the hunt. And let me tell you, that is way harder than chasing things down a buffalo, because they've got to maintain and feed people for the whole 365 days. They've got to make sure the family structures were always there. So Crees particularly were a matriarchal society. Women were not only the neck, they're the head. Men were maybe the feet. I'm not trying to be facetious. That is the actual truth. When you tell stories about when stories would come in about raiders, white raiders would come into First Nation communities, they said, first it was always okay to know you'd have the band of protectors, the First Nations men would come out and it would be tough. But they also knew the tougher battle was coming, because they'd have to go into the communities and they'd have to fight those women. And those women would fight until there's no breath left in them, because they're there to protect those children, to protect their way of life, and protect who they are. So at the center of a Cree family is always a senior female. Right? Always a senior female. Because not only were they the neck and the brains, they were the heart of that community. So then the problem is, right, because nuclear families is lovely, but what happens when you see how the little mom and the dad there are holding hands and they're all, blank expression? So what happens, honestly, when you split an atom? What's that called? Does anybody know what that's called? What's that?
Nuclear fission.
Nuclear fission. So what is that a positive or a negative thing? What is it? Boom! Boom. And that's true. And it's right. When you break that nuclear family, it causes boom. And it should cause boom. Because it's designed to do that. It's designed, core of my core, root of my root. It's designed that way. Right? Where First Nations people don't necessarily have that same boom, or they used to when I first started doing this, I was co-chair of the TRC in Edmonton. And there was a 7th event, right? And by this time, the bureaucrats were already starting to leave because they wanted new jobs, right? So they gave us a lot of say, right? They gave us a lot of say. So I would go out and to communities like this and say, tell us about things and how you would do it. And I had a little survey beforehand, and I'll give you all the survey. Tell me 3 good things about Indigenous people that you know, and give me 3 bad things about Indigenous people you know. So the top 3 of all of that were alcohol was a problem, addiction was a problem, And they use the word, funny words, but promiscuous was, boil it all down, child welfare problems or all these other kind of questions, right? And they were basically promiscuous, right? And the third thing that was even that they were spiritual. So they liked to drink, they liked to party, and they didn't feel bad about it, right? That's basically what I got out of that, right? So, and that was, it's a funny thing, but it's also a bit of a misconception, right, about family structure, right, about how families operate and how they animate it inside themselves. Right? Because it's like again, back to the blood and breath. I would know Tim. Sorry, Tim, you said in a really wrong spot. Tim would have strengths and weaknesses within his family. And he was going to give strengths and weaknesses to his 2 children. 3! He paid the $47. No one was going, that third one. Expensive. Anyway, he would have strengths and weaknesses to give his children. Right? But unfortunately, his weaknesses in some of his kids may outweigh his strengths in some of his children. And in this nuclear family, there is no other place for this other child or this other person in this family to receive the unlocking of the knowledge that they necessarily need to have, right? Because of the tightness of family. And right now, particularly, the breakdown of the European families are so predominant. There's a lot of warehousing, we put our elders in facilities, which is awesome, but there's not always a top tuning. And is your brother nearby you?
No, 3 sisters.
Where are they?
They're within 20 minutes.
So you're pretty good. Seriously, you're really, really good. But the vast majority of my peers, right, don't have that same situation, right? So that's the breakdown. So what's going to happen to that nuclear family is that some of these kids will need an uncle or an aunt or a brother or a friend that will actually unlock some of the stories and the histories inside of them. So in our covalent families, that is the biggest strength of it. It is not the fact that I own my children. Right? I don't own my children. They're not a descendant of me. Right? They're not part of what I need to make myself look good. Right? They are them in themselves. They're equally created. Right? And that's a tough thing for a lot of Europeans to understand is why is it that these kids are not being taken care of? Pre-contact time, right, there would have been a whole nest of people taking care of these children, and not out of possession. Kids were never a possession within a community, right? They were part of themselves, allowed to grow. So, how old are you, my friend? 10? 9. So at 9, she, from age 0 to about 2.5, they would be in intimate. They would live in an intimate environment. The baby would live with grandma and maybe the mom and aunt, and the dad would come in once in a while, but a very intimate experience. Right? Not much contact. But from 3 to 7 or 8 years old, that kid would then become part of the large community. Like you wouldn't necessarily expect her to sleep in your teepee every night. She would be sleeping over there with a friend or over here but everybody knew where every kid was. Because a child was not part of a family, they're part of a cluster. Part of a cluster. So then after 7, then they would say, your name is Writes Well with Deep Thoughts. That's her pre-name or something like that, right? And over time, she would have 7 or 8 different names. She'd start off as, kind of bow-legged, swat like this, who knows what it would have been like, But then, as she got older and she did something, all of a sudden she ran really fast, and they would give her that name, and then she would do this. But this age, this is when she started to become useful. right? Or 8, 9 years old. So then she would have this great aunt next to you here. And then you would hang with her for another 5, 6 years. And she would be your primary education giver, your grandma or great aunt or something like that. Right? And her job, because she's so wise, you are, look at you. You know? She's so wise, and she would have the primary caregiving apparatus to this child, right? Until she was probably 11, 12 years old. Then after 11, 12 years old, she has to prove herself. And that's when there would be a ceremony, the final ceremony of her, with how she walks out into the community. So there's a series of walking into the communities and how they would be useful. But not just for herself. It's not how she could be good for herself and how she could be good for her own economic, personal betterment. It is how she would be good for all these people over here. And not only for her dad, but for this lady over here. Right? Do you know this girl? Oh. Do you know this girl? Even for her. Who doesn't know her? Right?
Was it the same for boys?
Oh, doing the little boys. Boys it was less intentional, right? It was way less intentional. So there'd be a series of whatever, but they would run about and destroy things. That'd be one age, and the second age would be how then they would learn to protect, right? And that'd be the primary job, is to learn how to protect. And again, they would live. The biggest difference between a Blackfoot cluster and a Cree cluster was the role of societies. Like Crees were much more pragmatic in their government structures. Right? So when they did a buffalo hunt, it was much more collectively. Many people did many roles. But in Blackfoot territory, Blackfoot had very much societies, and each society would have their own song, and each song then would tell them what they did and how they were. Right? So at an age, then a boy would join a society. Right? And then the society would tell them if they were explorers, what they did. Right? So men tend to live in much more clustered, where women were taught to live for the whole. Right? Does that make sense to you? So, covalent families. I'm going to tell one final story about family and how it's pertinent today. So my biological sister and I grew up with my Irish father, and he was an alcoholic and abusive. Maybe one of those words, not because he was Irish, but because he was an a-hole. Right? And then there's him being Irish, it had everything to be with being that word. And there's better words that he would be actually described as. And so he came to a time when my sister was being born, and I saw him holding her up and I thought, oh, I really don't want that life for Natasha. So I pulled him aside and I said, Dad, I think it's time for you to go. He says, I don't want to be around here. I would like to swear. If I said a few cuss words, would people be okay? Yeah. So he said, I want to get the fuck out of here anyway. Oh, good. And here's $375, take the plane, and I'll never see you again. And at this time I was 17, right? And so Natasha was going to be born my biological sister. And we were poor. Like, there is no romance and people, oh, let's go back to the simple life. And no, there is no loveliness in being poor, right? So we were dirt poor. My mom was, found a job working at the hospital, cleaning, and I was still trying to go to university, trying to get in and all that kind of jazz. So in that time, Natasha got sick. Right? So my mom was working, and she was at work where she couldn't leave, otherwise she would have got fired. Right? So I took her to the hospital. And, I was brownish at the time and poor, and so the nurse came up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking care of my sister." Right? You have one or two options. Where's his mother? Where's his mother? I said, "Well, she's working." "Oh, really? Working? What do you mean by working?" I said, "Oh, she's working, whatever." You have two options. You can leave here and abandon the child, or you can go home. Those are my options. Being poor, being 17, holding a baby, looking not like a white person. So I left there, and she got a little bit sicker, and I thought, I wonder if that bitch is gone. Right? So then I took her again, and I looked in the hospital, and she wasn't there. And I said, "Oh, my baby's sick. Who's his parents?" "I am." "I'm his dad." "No." So I had her Alberta healthcare number. Total lied through my teeth. The baby got well, spent the day in the hospital, dehydrated, everything was hallelujah. But then I realized, not only did I have to take responsibility getting my father, not only did I have to take the harm away from this child, I also have to learn to protect this child. So it's not only taking the danger away, but it's also putting in life in there as well. So then, 2-3 years later, we were at a party, and she was like tiny, and everybody was calling Dad. "Dad! Dad!" It was like, Tasha's male. "Dad." She looked at me. "Dad?" I go, "Yes, I'm your dad." So I became a father in that moment by breath. Not by blood, but by breath. I got legal guardianship over her so that things wouldn't happen again. Fast forward into the future, my mother is sick, and I've adopted another child, Yvetta, bone of my bone, life of my life. Simon has a massive drug problem. I got a phone call, right, it says, Natasha, she's my cousin. Simon said, I'm going to go to jail, right? So I was at the cathedral, the priest in the cathedral, sitting there like this, and she goes, "Yeah, Travis, I'm in jail." "Oh, Simon, and I'm pregnant." "Oh, no." And then I found out I was a dad. Right? She says, "Can you take her?" I go, "Yes." So 7 months later, Yvetta was born, 2 months premature, 3 pounds 7 ounces, 3 pounds 12 ounces. Spent the time with her, and she became part of my family by breath. So now Natasha, my mom has died, right? And we're mourning. And in the midst of it, Natasha has no desire. She dated, and she's not going, and she just doesn't want to be part of that. She says, "Dad, I don't know if I want to be part of that." "What do you mean part of that?" "I tried to date, and I don't know if I can pull that off just yet." She says, "But I want to have a child." I go, "What do you mean you have a child?" She goes, "I want to go and have artificial insemination and have a child." And I go, "Your body, your choice, your love, your hope, but I'll be there for you. Whatever you want to do with this particular decision, I'll be there for you because I know Mom will be there for you." So Noella, her name, will be born on the 15th of May, right? So right now she's having, as we speak, this is Natasha's baby shower. So that's a beautiful story. So Noella's going to come into the world on the 15th of May. I'm biologically her uncle. Practically, or whatever, historically, her grandfather, right? But because there's no other man in our household, I'm going to be his dad. So what would you call me? Uncle? Grandpa? They don't know yet. Because a child has a life and has freedom and has agency. And that will come to us when the child comes to us. But that is covalent families. And believe it or not, all of you come from covalent families. Maybe 2 or 3 generations, and we are moving more and more into the idea of nuclear families, right? Nuclear families. But the thing that's going to save us, right? I work in the inner city of Edmonton. The fastest growing population that comes to my soup kitchen, it's not called soup kitchen, but I'll call it here soup kitchen, are white males. The fastest growing people who are coming to our soup kitchens who are from the suburbs. There's this one kid who walked into Same Face. At first you thought, oh, he must be a volunteer. But then he walked closer and he started twitching. Oh, fentanyl. There we go. Come on in there, Tim. Welcome. And he just, in that moment, in that 15 or so minutes of a party, something happened. Someone gave him something in one capacity or another. He's lone, tired, scared, 15, 16, 17 years old. He's not going to, he's not the world's greatest scholar. He's not going to be a hockey player. He's not going to be all these things. He's a little bit angry. Right? Because there's no space for those particular people in our culture anymore. Just average folk. You have to be something fantastic. You have to be a hockey star, or a lawyer, or a doctor, making $1.3 million a year. Okay, but you have to be with that. So these young men are coming in broken, unloved, and addicted. And they're addicted to fentanyl. Right? And for me, the story of why being a treaty people is important is because of how we're choosing how to choose life. Right? Currently, the way we choose life and how we organize ourselves is this what I would call a very bureaucratic structure in the West. Right? There is a very particular way, an orderly way of engaging things, very orderly ways of how you live and act in the world. The very orderly way in which we govern ourselves and our ethics. Right? So we call that very tight, homogeneous nature community. Right? In fact, our churches, our lives are built on that one sense of community. Right? In fact, you all came here, you all lived in forts, and I was very comfortable with the homogeneous nature of things. If we all lived, and this is it, this is the end of the world, right? And we all close up, we'd become very homogeneous. We'd find ways and means in which we'd all live, right? Because we're forwarded in, with only one entrance in and one entrance out. To leave and come, there's only one particular way of coming in and out, right? So you become very homogeneous. You feel somewhat safe, but also maybe a little bit fearful, right? Because as someone walks in the door and there's only one way in, we'll all turn. If someone came in the door right now, and they looked a little bit different, we would know what to do with them. We'd be a little bit scared. Would they know us? How would they know us? Right? Whereas Indigenous people never, that's not our motto. We have all this land. Think of this land, on this church, on this land right now. You can see someone coming 30 kilometers away, so flat, right? There's no way in. There's many ways in. So the other word I use is communitas. Is many entrypoints in. And that's an important concept. I think this is the one thing that the church particularly has to learn to move from. From one way in to many points in. Right? It's not, you don't always have to, her wisdom, I don't always have to receive it, but I have to respect it and honor it. And 60% of what she says, I can live with. 40% of the I can't live with, she's got to live with. I don't have to. Right? But same here, 60%, 40%, 30%. But the question is not, do you follow or can you aspire to, but what can we live with each other? How can we live together? How can we find ways to prosper together? How can we find ways to be hopeful together? That's the very nature of communitas. Many entrance points in. Here's the saddest news that I've come to the conclusion after working tirelessly to get millennials into the church. They ain't coming. They ain't coming. Because there's only one way in. Right? They ain't coming. You can change your music to have a rock band, they ain't coming. You can change this thing so it's, hip-hop music, ain't coming. Because what they need is fluidity. They need to be part of something that's multi-faceted and multi-dimensional. Because they think differently. Because they need many ways in. So communitas. I need a time check. I don't know where I'm at the time. How much time?
You got
Half an hour. So, the way we currently govern ourselves is there's sovereign. Team is sovereign. You're a pastor. You're a pastor. You love the book, the Bible, right? You stand up here. Here's the word. I'm going to tell you what the word is, and I'm going to tell you how to live. Because of the weight of the sovereignty of the book, the sovereignty of this building, the sovereignty of who our structures are. Very, very orderly and very efficient. So if you look at a courtroom, an education room, and a worship room, they're all similar. There is a professional, a judge, a priest, a professor. They follow a very rigid book, right? A textbook, a law book, the Bible, right? And there's usually a very, very specific suggestion of what you want to do in a socially ordered way in which you want to do something, right? And then it goes out, and then the population saying, Hallelujah, or Amen, right? Well, unfortunately, creeds are not that efficient. We are not efficient people. Right? My joke is, by the time you set up the whole structure of the world, you design the cities, you design courtrooms and law offices and all this kind of stuff, we are still deciding what we're going to have for lunch. Right? Because it takes us a long time to do something. It's like, how many times do we have to go around in a circle? You've all heard, indigenous elders go on and on and on and drone and drone. And then we're all listening. It takes us a long time. Right? Because of the nature of relationships. Because we have to understand what it means to do ceremony. Right? Every act then becomes an act of ceremony. And ceremony for us is to build not common language or common sense. Right? Because those things don't make sense to us. Common language and common sense don't make sense to us. Simply don't make sense. Because you and I, over time, will develop a common relationship. Right? We'll have to develop common. But still, what this guy's going to do, I don't know what he's going to do, what he thinks common sense is. Common sense could be for him to fart every morning at 7 o'clock.
You're going too well.
Yes. And that could be common sense. So I decree 7 a.m. toot time. And the rest of us, that's not common. But I'm making fun of it, but that's sometimes when we think about common sense. Why do they just drive? So common sense. But there can be common relationships. And common relationships are built on ceremony. you giving a teaching, she's giving a teaching, you're giving a teaching. Each of those becomes acts of ceremony. Then we get a common relationship. And then also, we can't just, assume things, right? And we also have to worry about this child here who's always part of everything. We don't talk about them, or didn't talk about them. They were there. So they obviously heard us. Right? So we have to give them mentorship. Right? So mentorship meaning you have to be responsible, and you have to be responsible. So there's a mentorship thing, and that takes some time. And then you have to come to this idea of consensus. And people think consensus is compromise. It's not. You compromise in marriages and they probably end up in divorce. But if you come to consensus, consensus means that you look at Tim, I love you, brother. Just we're in it together and whatever. Here are things I can live with. Here are things I can't live with. Right? How many of those things that I can't live with are you willing to move on?
6.
6. How about 3? Make it 3. So then we come to a consensus. And these are the... I still won't love everything about him. He'll still annoy me 3 of those times. But I've chosen to say I can live with those things. Right? Good marriages I've heard of is built not on compromise, but on consensus. They say these are things I can live with, and these are things I cannot. Again, that takes some time. Okay. So the governing structure of being in this consensus, building mentorship, being open, being multi, takes time. And a level of commitment that I think we have to learn to have in the church and in society. Right? We have to figure out ways in which we can live with each other. So we're coming to a point where I think where my giftedness to you is going to be useful to you. Right now you think, oh, these Cree people are just annoying and on the news and wasting money. Right? So the first story I talked about being cousin. The we saw these white people coming in as cousins. And then you guys were all flurried out and didn't know how to live in this land. I honestly believe for this land to continue to prosper, this land, I'm talking about the land, Mother Earth, to continue to prosper. And for us as people who live on this land, we're going to have to learn to care for each other in a different way. That's not a political statement. Vote NDP, UCP, ABC. That's not about that. That's not about the political structure of who we are, but the very framework of how we start seeing each other as people. And we can no longer see the person who voted differently than us as an enemy. We can no longer see someone who eats differently than us as foreign. We can no longer do that because young people are fluid. Right? I'm a big fan of Brexit. I know it has nothing to do with me. If the English leave or go, but I find it funny. The very breakdown of a country over something that they cannot figure out ways to talk to each other about. They simply cannot figure out how to come to consensus. What can we live with? What can we live with? So there's this one person who's lovely, an Irishman, because I love Irish people, right? He goes an idea of shared sacred space, right? But in that shared sacred space, there's an idea that Tim is complex. He's not just a white farmer who's a pastor with 3 kids. Those are all his identifiers, right? But there's a deep-rooted animator that makes him like he loves chocolate and eating eggs in the morning. All these weird things that make him up. and makes him truly who he really, really is. Things that really animate him and get him excited about living life. So he's multifaceted. So when he struggles with himself, when he struggles with the other, when he struggles with the land, each of those gives him a very specific and unique identity, not sovereign. So in that identity, so young people are starting to see themselves not just as Anglicans or Christians or white or brown or Canadian, right? They go deeper. Who am I in relationship to the other? Who am I in relationship to myself? And who am I in relationship with the land in which I walk? They're highly environmental. They worry about the future in a very different way than our grandfathers do. Again, that's not bad, just different. Right? So they work through this, but also their identity not only is it multifaceted, it changes. Isn't that annoying? So Indigenous people right now are in this process. So what I would call, we are in a flint time, Indigenous people, about our own identity. Because we don't know what kind of pot even to sledge from sometimes. Because each of those pots means something different, and there's a cultural expression of that. So you take a flint, right, and you hit it. It sparks. And you hope one of those sparks will take into it. And right now there's a whole mess in our fire. A mess. There's hurt, there's all these different things. And we want to, eventually, Indigenous people are trying to get to a place where we can have a clean fire, right? Where we're no longer classified as addiction problems or residential school problems. It's not about moving away from those things, but we want to change our identity. So the only way to do that is burn some of our old fire, stuff that projections and thoughts that you think about us and we think about ourselves, the bias. Right? So right now we're flicking the flint, and sparks going out, and every time it sparks out, and we go up and we hit a little fire, right? And you start burning this little fire, right? And you think, oh, we got it. So we put too much wood on it, and that fire goes out. So we used to call ourselves Indians, Indigenous, and white people. What do you call yourselves? How do you identify yourselves? And I say, we're still working that out. We're still hitting the flint, trying to make fire. Because we know we don't want to be pan-Indian. We don't want to be one group of people. We want to be Crees, and we want to be Sudu. In fact, we even moved to the point in Edmonton. Cree is even slowly becoming not the word in which Indigenous people call themselves anymore. It is Nawaluk, right? And that means people of the four directions who live on the land. That's what that word is, right? And then when I hear that word, I think, wow, that word can be used by a lot of different people, of different colors, of different nationalities. We were all people of this land. It's a multifaceted way of looking at that flint that's hitting. So as we hit that flint, we do not know yet what fire is going to burn with Indigenous relationships. But I know there's still a lot of hurt. Because we don't want to get over it. We want to find something new. We don't want to be assimilated. We want to wampum. We want to find ourselves in relationship with the other peoples of this land. How we can be in good, sacred, safe relationship with each other. Right? That is what we want. We don't want you to go away. That's not true. The truth of it, I'm part of sociology, and there's this woman, a really tough street woman, and this beautiful young investigator, question asker, was writing a thesis on women who go to who work in, I don't know what they're called, massage parlors. And so they were in the congregation, and she was asking really well thought out questions. And then finally this young woman got exasperated. She says, what do you really want? And she says, I want you to go the fuck home. She said, no, home. Take your disease, take all your things, take your pollution, and list it, And it struck her, it struck me. She didn't say that in an angry kind of voice. It was a nostalgic voice. What would it like to be I want to return to who I could have been without you. Who I could have been without the residential schools, without smallpox, without alcohol. That's what I want to return to. Right? And I think that is the great hope of Indigenous people. It's not that we want to diminish your Europeanness. We want to have the multifaceted opportunity to make our identity and change a little bit. But also, the third thing, it has to be a choice. And that's where the rest of the population has to be involved in. Because let me tell you, this is a funny story because it's really silly. One of my friends is an African person, but was born in Edmonton, 30 years ago. And his family was one of the first Africans in the family, and this family was from Nigeria. They weren't slaves or anything you think about people of color. They all come here as refugees or an ease of some sort. Well, they're Nigerian and very wealthy and very educated. So they came here, and he spent the last 30 years in Canada, and he wanted to go back to his country. Right? He looked black. He looked black. He looked black. He would go back to his country, and he thought he had something there. But he was walking around the streets, and he was trying. You know something? I came back here. I liked it, but it wasn't really home for me because the land that he's been on affected him. Like he knows what a toque is, for example. He knows what mukluks are. He knows what ski pants are. So his whole vocabulary of how his identity has been formated is not because of the color of his skin. It's because of the land in which he's been residing on for the last 30 years. So let me tell you, if you're going back to Scotland and you're thinking you'll go all in there because you like a bit of Scotch, it doesn't make you Scottish. Because I like Scotch too. So it's about this land inbred in you. It's in your fingernail. It's in your breath. It's in your lungs. Irrespective of the color of your skin. Right? So at some point in time, in the next bit of time, a lot of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, foreign, not foreign, have come to the conclusion, I've signed my name on the treaty. I signed it. My name on the treaty, because I am part of this land. I am formulated by this land. So that's what it means to be a treaty person. Is you're choosing this identity of being on this land. Right? And being part of this land will change your identity, who you are as a person. Go back to Scotland, drink your Scotch. But you're not Scottish. Right? Even my sister here is yeah, all the time. She's as Lutheran as I've ever seen a person coming in. I saw the way she made coffee. I saw the way she presented herself. She's part of this land. Right? Part of Red Deer. God love you all. All part of this land. This is it. This is your little ecology of it. I'm going to go through the next quickly. Because as we move as people, as we start finding the Wampum way, and I'm not in any way Mohawk, But I love the idea of wampum. And wampum, it was originally the idea that indigenous and non-indigenous peoples would walk simultaneously. There's a belt, and there's two lines. That we could walk on this land. There's enough land, enough hope, enough dreams for both people to land in. I love the idea of that. But I recently had a conversation with this Blackfoot elder. I went down and close to the territory which I'm no longer home in. And so I was talking to this Blackfoot, and we're talking about smudging. And we're talking about smoke, and he goes, it's important that our smudges mingle. You know, you put two smudges, two flavors of smoke together, they will kind of dance with each other, right? And so with indigenous and non-indigenous, it's the same thing. It's having these two smokes that look for points of contact. It's important. That these points of contact, as our smudges and as our cultures touch and find similarities, it's important that we do recognize the universal truths of spirituality and of being a person. But it's equally important to understand there's times when our smoke won't touch, when there's differences, right? And our object is not to make one smoke, to make us one in that sense. The object is to make us one so that when we touch each other and when we see the differences, that we choose not to see the other as the enemy. So as important as touching and knowing commonalities are, is it equally important to know that we are different. And not to be afraid of it. We don't have to be afraid that we walk this land differently. What's your wife's name?
Joanne.
Joanne. Do you guys 100% agree all the time? Is Joanne in the room?
She's not, but she would back me in saying, no, we do not all agree. She wouldn't want to agree.
She wouldn't want to agree, right? And you guys are pretty close. Yeah, pretty close, you know. But again, even in those familiar relationships, we have to give space for difference, right? And part of that is understanding language, lodge, and land as we move on this land. We have to maybe come up with a new set of language to describe us. And sometimes those words, you may be forced to learn a couple of Cree words because there is no other, you can't translate. It's like German. You speak German? It's like German. One of my favorite things, I love German. And this German philosopher, and there's this word that it was English, and then you put this German word. It was like that long. You know German words, right? They're really long. I looked at that and I was like, why didn't you translate that word? So there's a footnote to it. So this one word had a footnote that was like that long, in tiny print, because there was no other word other than that word. And on this land, there's words on this land that are Cree, that are Blackfoot, that are Navajo, and there is no other word. The only way to live well on this land is to actually know what that Cree word is. And those Cree words may become part of our language. Like with Chituin, and with Tasquin. And words that kind of like we've heard lingering, we drive by with Tasquin all the time. But it means something, right? They chose that word because it means a sense of unity. But not just unity like we can, you got yours, I got mine, let's keep it that way. Not that type of unity. It is a unity that we will share in each other's prosperity. Right, we'll share. And prosperity doesn't mean that it's not, I'll have a whole bunch of stuff, you have a whole bunch of stuff, let's have the most, who has the most stuff dies wins. Not that kind of prosperity. The prosperity, you will ultimately find the fullness of who you are and who God has made you to be. Not the prosperity of a bank account or stuff, but the prosperity that you wake up in the morning, you feel fulfilled, and you feel loved, and you feel cared for. And the fullness of who you are is a richness to the whole of society, the people that you know. That level of prosperity. And we'll do this good thing. Those are really complicated slides, so I'm not going to go through them. How can we get through this together? How can I be an Inuit whose mother was Cree, whose father was Irish, who, when they fought, this is truth, this is honest truth. My mother has, you know that indigenous accent? You all heard it, and it's really, I can't do it very well. And then my father had he was from Ireland, literally off the boat island. And in his whole environment were Irish, right? So, the dang. So you'd have a dang, and then they would have a couple of drinks, right? And then they would have into a fight. Dang. And that's what it sounded like, but I could understand both of them. The only person who could understand them is sometimes they'd be agreeing the whole entire night, but at the end of the night they'd be fighting. Because I said to myself, because they couldn't hear each other. They simply couldn't hear each other. I think sometimes that's where we're at in our relationship with indigenous peoples, and with immigrant peoples, and with people who are coming to this land. Because we're so afraid of losing our identity that we're not actually grasping the identity of who we actually are, right? We've imported a lot of identity, and then we have to figure out a way to hold on to that identity. But the reality is, we have to come into a new time, and the new time is shared. Right? So the only way we're going to do this is what I would call social cohesion. So my friend would have an idea, right? How do we get more young people into the church? What do you think?
Pay them?
Pay them? How do we get more young people into the church? I don't know. How do we get more young people into the church? Do you want to even come to church? That church? How do we get more young people in the church?
Listen to them.
Listen to them. How do you get more young people into the church?
Try and set an example that you're trying to live a Christian life to them.
Set an example.
Invite them.
Invite them.
Bring them with you.
Bring them with you. Who's done all those things?
Yeah, it's more entrances, like you were saying at the beginning.
Yeah.
We have to have different needs. It's not, what we're doing isn't working.
What we're doing isn't working. Let me tell you, people, if we just become like those big evangelical pastors things, no.
Allow them.
What's that?
Allow them.
Allow
And love them.
them. And love them. Right. Because of my particular unique role and in the community, I had this one pastor who comes from a very large church in Edmonton. And he goes, "Sit me down. This is going to be something about gay people. I get it, you hate gay people, blah, blah." That's what I thought, honestly. Because we've had that conversation before. Our church is going to come up with that soon. Travis, we're losing our young people. I know. That must be really hard for you, because your whole thing is designed for young people. Yeah. But they're getting bored of us. Right? So that's the reality, not only of our dying churches, but of the churches that we think are prosperous. They're equally worried about losing young people as well. The fastest growing population of spiritual is people who do have no faith or no institutional religion. But one of the fastest growing also is people who are spiritual. So we have this weird thing, right? People who don't want to go to church but people who are hungry for spirituality, right? I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm saying we got to figure out a way to start listening, start loving, start inviting, people, young people particularly, into our churches, right? And then once we hear their concern, we don't have to say, well, you'll get over that. And that's what we do. We bring them in, bring Indigenous people in. Like there's I talk to a lot of Indigenous people. I do a lot of ceremony for them, right? But they have no desire to come to church on a Sunday, right? And it's not because they don't like us anymore. It just doesn't bring anything. It's not part of their common relationship. It's not part of a common space that they understand. It's not part of an interrelationship that they feel that they can be part of. Right? There's not trying to be a downer. No, I'm not trying to be a downer, right? Because I think we start moving to once we know something, once we hear their concerns, then we should start acknowledging some things. Maybe what we need to acknowledge is that Jesus Christ is more than a set of ethical standards. Maybe Jesus Christ is bigger, more profound in relationship than we thought we had controlled. Maybe Jesus Christ, the act of the Creator, is this loving God. I mean, Anglicans are really big about the collar. We don't go anywhere without a collar. Boop, 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 boop. Conservative, liberal, high church, low church, medium church, no church. We wear them. And they tell you, it better be black. If you want to remind everybody, in the fall. That's why the shirts are black, right? Is because it is representative of that we are people of the fall.
Are you rebelling?
Mm-hmm. You should find out how. So then what we do, then we put the white little cassock over top of us, right? And that white is to show us that we can be move in the form of persona Christos. That Christos, Jesus Christ, is over top of us, and that is what people should see. But still at the heart of us is the black shirt. So I was sitting with this guy, and he was, I never disagreed with the sermon more. I got up there, and I threw all my black shirts away. I only wear white shirts now, for two reasons. I want everybody to know that Jesus Christ is Lord. Not just my sin, but Jesus Christ is Lord. And the first thing, the very first blessing, before the fall, before we were created, we were a blessing to the world. Right? We're a blessing to the world, and Jesus Christ is Lord. That's wear white. So I only wear white shirts now. Not because I'm trying to say that I'm pure, right? But I'm saying, if Jesus Christ is that good, maybe I should see the world the way Jesus Christ sees the world. Maybe I should act the way in which Jesus Christ, not the way my political stance is, not the way in which my desire to live my life is, but if Jesus Christ is these things, maybe we should put that first. So to me, that's this mini sermon, sorry. So that acknowledgement is that. Once we get to a place of knowing something, we can start finding ways of acknowledging it. And then finally, we can call to consensus. Again, a consensus of having young people here ask, what can we all live with? How can we be a community of faithful worshipers of Jesus Christ together? Well, I don't want to worship Jesus. I want to live by Jesus. That's a legitimate question. In St. Faith, we no longer worship. Because whom are we worshiping? That's a big question. Whom are we worshiping? But the question is, who are we following is more important to them. It's not who we worship on a Sunday. It's who we're following on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever the rest of the days. Who are we following? That's a legitimate question, So we've been dealing and angling with that word. I still say it, because I know what it means. There's a whole bunch of other people in my community that don't call it worship. You know, they come to church, and we call it names, like there's Standing Stones and Bleeding Heart. We have names for our services, and it means a very particular liturgical style, which we'll get into after the break. Am I good for the time?
Sure, yeah.
No, it's break time.
Yeah.
There's more to come. I lost control. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Travis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a break and we'll gather back about 11 o'clock.